One, two, 1, 2. One, two.
Good morning on this important day in the calendar of our country. Today is Heritage Day in South Africa. That's why we are dressed the way we are to mark this important day. Now we have 2 hours for this session, and I don't want to waste time. I'll ask the panelists to come to the fore, starting with our public protector. Public protector, you are welcome. Please come through and on stage. Professor Maserimole, Professor Halima, Professor James, you are very welcome to South Africa. We are happy to have you here, coming all the way from the United States of America. Then we have a new doctor, someone who just graduated with a PhD at the University of Johannesburg. I'm informed that is going to be online. As you can see there, Dr. Musi Maiman. Honorable Maimani, you are at the right place at the right time. This way you are coming. It's a matter of time. You'll soon be a professor and join all of us. It is very nice. Some of us just retired from the public service, and then the next day the title just changed. So if you prepare yourself, you will not have all sorts of problems. But let me start by posing this question to the panelists. I know all of them are prepared. We'll give you at least reasonable time to do so, to present. But here's a question. We have corruption while we have the rules. Many rules that seek to deal with corruption or ethics broadly. We have rules that deal with performance. We are not performing. The rules are there. We have rules. There are tensions in the state. So it would be something else if we're fighting because there are no rules. Because everyone will say, I'm fighting with so and so because we are trying to make sense of this phenomenon called the state. We are failing to deliver because there are no rules that tell you what you must do, how you must report, but we are struggling to deliver even in that instance. Ethical issues abound and ethical practices abound in the state. And the state, I include the universities. Because sometimes when we meet in this format, the university is talking about government, which is not the state. Government is not the state, it's part of the state. So when we reflect, we must reflect 360 degrees and include the situation in academia. SRCs are very rich now. While I was in the SRC, I only had a pager. And got a message. Now members of the SRC own property. Members of the SRC want to be involved in everything, in the running of institutions, particularly where money is involved. SRCs want to appoint vice chancellors. They want to do practically everything. And so it means that when we have these conversations, there must be 360 so that we account for the total situation. We see now what is happening in the security services. Very regulated. Those are constitutional structures, are not like the departments that some of us are running that are established by proclamations. So PPU have structures established by law, by the constitution, but they are found wanting, not because there are no rules. So in conclusion, what I'm saying is, where to now? Because the rules are there, but behavior has not changed, or it's not changing in the way that should be changing. DGs and ministers have their own political admin interface, mainly around the appointment of very junior officials. By the way, and DG Vukela can attest to this. You see the situation in this Department of Social Development, where the appointment of the chief of staff has drawn such a very important department into a serious conflict. Not because there are no rules that tell us how to appoint a chief of staff and what requirements are. So out of 63 million people, we fail to get a chief of staff who qualifies. I'm not making a judgment because you have not pronounced on that, but I'm saying that if that is the issue, and it turns out that in that important department, out of 63 million South Africans, we can't find just one person who has what is being asked for. And the whole department get sucked up into that. So having said that, I will start with you in terms of my little protocol. Honorable Maiman, Dr. Maiman, as I've welcomed you, you'll soon be a member of SAPAM and join us. It's the right place to be. So let me start with you. You have no more than 10 minutes to do that. I know you can easily say a lot in that space of time. So over to you, Honorable Maiman. Thank you. Okay. It looks like you are muted if you have started to speak. Yes, we can hear you now.
Able to be there in person. I had flown in from Singapore, and so I'd hoped that there would be a direct flight from Singapore to Seshego or to Sekhukhune, but it doesn't seem like that has been quite achieved yet, and so we have to get there at some point. But to delegates and to the professors that are there, I want to thank you kindly for the opportunity to be able to address this very important institution to our nation. Let me say, I didn't catch you properly, the program director, when you asked whether I can be a member of SAPAM. I thought by merely achieving a PhD that I could be automated as a member. But if I need to fill in membership forms, be part of a structure for 2 years before I can come, please let me know, and then I can begin the process immediately so that our membership can be fulfilled. This is a very important topic. Ultimately, it speaks to the future of our nation. And I want to frame it, perhaps maybe starting with the initial question, which is to build ethical leadership, to build a competent and a capable state, must respond to the question, what objectives are you in fact trying to achieve? Many people have been critical of perhaps maybe the policy of cadre deployment, but in some ways, we've never answered the question, which says the capability of the state must be aligned to particular objectives. The failure of our current government coalition is that it has not articulated what it hopes to achieve. And so, as an absence of being able to say the economy of the future of South Africa must look like this, it limits the purpose of education to its own intrinsic value rather than its extrinsic purpose. And the extrinsic purpose must speak inherently to this idea of capability as shaped by saying, if you want an economy that is focused on agriculture, well, how many PhDs are you producing that can feed into the notion of an agricultural economy? If you want a society upon which your financial services sector is able to respond to issues of global markets, how many students and what is the capability you are producing within that space? Because as things stand at the moment, and I want to use the next 10 minutes quite adequately, we have a dilemma in that you've got multiple departments that cannot articulate what their objectives are. And because it cannot articulate what their objectives are or how they're aligned, not only to the National Development Plan or the medium-term budget or to the medium-term development plan, you end up with each department doing what is right in its own eyes. And I would argue that the seed of corruption, as President Mbeki so articulated, begins at incompetence, but that incompetence is not born out of people being unqualified. It is born out of people misaligned with the objectives. It is tantamount to asking a doctor or a general practitioner who is a doctor in medical sectors to be able to come run an engineering plant. Whilst they may have a set of qualification, it means that effectively they are incompetent for the task that they are supposed to do. And therefore, as a natural outcome, you end up with a mismatch of skills. So therefore, it is in that light that I wanted to begin by saying it is going to be crucial that if we're going to articulate where South Africa needs to go, we need to speak about the economies of the future. Currently, as we sit at the moment, our geopolitics, our realignments have meant the state has to ask itself some serious questions. Whilst you and I can sit here debating certain legislation, the fact is the world is talking digitization, it is talking AI, it is talking the fact that economies of the future do not reside in the sovereignty of nations, but they run in the sovereignty of individuals who are able to move their capital anywhere else in the world. So to be and then equally so, we have to respond to multilateral cooperations around defense, around multiple sectors. So I ask this and I posit that thought because I think what SAPAM needs to respond to is not to the current infrastructure of the state only, but it has to respond to a state as framed by the future and what that will mean. As I alluded to earlier, I've just come back from Singapore, and others may have drawn conclusions about what the legacy of Singapore is. The legacy I draw out of it is that the success of Singapore was born out of a fundamental, strong leadership that built strong institutions, but those institutions resided on the second point, which I'd like to make, program director, which is the idea that you need to educate your populace. Because it is upon that that you can build accountability of the state. It is upon that that you are able to create the skills that form the basis of what a public service must look like. And so we can argue all day long about the professionalization of the state. I want to be critical to say that the professionalization of the state begins with having an ecosystem of education that allows itself to say, let us allow the highest bureaucrats in the state to represent profound qualifications. And to be provocative to you, program director, and to the organization of SAPA, I think you need to join the call to say anyone who works in civil servants must pass a basic entrance exam, as we have seen in developing nations, whether it be Malaysia, Singapore, and many others, to build this capability. Otherwise, the PSC or the Public Service Commission has an incapability of being able to align the required skills relative to what it means to the competence of those departments. The third component in professionalization I'd like to put forward is the idea of the professionalizations of the political space. The part of my research that I worked on even in doing my PhD was looking at what happens at local government when political parties don't have the skills that they bring to govern. So this is where public servants are often insulted, that you end up with working for councillors, MECs, or ministers who do not have the requisite competence to understand exactly what the questions or what the policy choices they need to make. And so they become heavily reliant on externalities rather than being able to lead and guide. And it is for this reason I do think if there ever was a need for a constitutional amendment, it would be that politicians cannot arrive in public service without a basic degree. Because in the absence of a basic degree, they often can't. I mean, I chair the budget committee now, and I'm often amazed that departments arrived with PowerPoints of over 100 slides. They present them this year as a turnaround strategy, and then next year they come back again and say we have a new turnaround strategy, but all of they've done is turned around the slides, and the politicians accept that as a function of what they need to do. I think we need to ask better of our leadership. Thirdly, is the question that you so eloquently put about what is the institutional capacity in a world that skills, in fact, need to be able to capacitate departments. And I would argue that the policy framework that we need to put on the table on things like procurement, on things like being able to attract the appropriate skills, require much better transparency. Currently, as we sit at the moment, there's been an appointment of a PIC board. None of us sitting in this room are none the wiser about knowing what skills qualified for people to sit within the PIC board. Or if a director general is about to be appointed, where is the process in terms of being able to demonstrate to the people of South Africa that these people have met the requisites? So one of the ways of being able to articulate a way of achieving a competent, capable, ethical state might require a higher level of transparency. And I would argue across all policy around procurement, etc., requires us to be able to say to all of us, how do we digitize the process so that ordinary citizens can follow it from end to end? Whether that question is about procurement, whether that question is about appointment, so that citizens are more informed. I'm often shocked when I arrive in Parliament and I realize that citizens are not engaged in processes of government. Right now, we are engaged in a process of seeking to appoint the new National Director of Public Prosecution, a senior bureaucrat effectively within the justice system, yet the process has not been codified in law to achieve a sense upon which it can be transparent. And I think the public protector and fellow panelists would agree on the process to say, let us make it more transparent. The process we've undertaken to appoint the PP, for example, is fairly transparent. People come to Parliament, they're interviewed. And I would argue the same process must be followed in the appointment of the National Director of Public Prosecution or other institutions that support democracy. We are, as a society, desperately in need of values and values of competence. And if you don't have a vision for what society and leadership must look like, the ethical question arises. We are attracting to people, and perhaps part of the culture that's been established is that civil service is a side hustle. Your main job is self-enrichment. And that's a failure of ethical leadership, but it's also a failure of how we elect our politicians. And I want to urge us strongly that the sooner we amend the Electoral Amendment Bill to allow for politicians to account to people, the better we'll be able to achieve a sense upon which people are qualified and are able to work within civil service. And we can ask and define for ourselves, when we say this person is ethical, are they accountable to the people? And are they serving the objectives that serve the people? So in conclusion, Program Director, I didn't want to take up more of your time because I'm sure you will have many questions and discussions to unpack. But I certainly do think that the sooner South Africa achieves a process upon which we can put a vision for our nation, articulate what our key objectives are, create an education ecosystem that allows for more people to be able to feature in the state, to redefine what the future of leadership will look like by amending the Electoral Amendment Bill, ensuring that our processes of government are more digitized so that transparency is the order of the day, and then achieving an economy upon which is much more inclusive, so that the elites don't end up being the ones at the center of capturing the state rather than being servants of the people. I think that the vision to achieve an ethical, capable state becomes one that is distant and will be served by interests of a few who seek to, if you like, patrimonialize the state for personal reasons and fail to serve the broader citizenship. We need to ask better of ourselves, and I think the future of South Africa needs better definition. So I hope that's in full, and I look forward to our engagement. And thank you to all our fellow panelists. Much appreciated, Program Director.
Program director, as an African child on Heritage Day, you know, it's always said it is respect to address elders when you are standing. So I felt it befitting that I do so. Firstly, I really want to answer your first question, you know, about what is it really that we are grappling with. We've got all the policies, we've got the law. I don't think as a country we've got a deficit in that respect. I mean, we've got the most progressive constitution in the world that we really pride ourselves with. What is it that we are grappling with? If you look at the financial sector, it speaks about having shifted from rules-based to risk-based. And what has informed that really? Human beings are fallible. We are humans. Aristotle, when he describes ethics, which is at the center of what we are grappling with as a country, he says ethics are basically a character of a human being. So the biggest problem that we are really grappling with is ourselves as humans, is this character, this complicated thing called a human being. And for me, that's really where everything starts, because it doesn't matter what systems you put in place. Even if we can be fully fleshed in AI tomorrow, who must program? It's the human. Now, if there's that ethical thread that's not tightened in the human being, then what output are we going to have in AI? And thereafter, we're going to say, there's no integrity in AI, there's no ethics in AI. How do we enforce these ethics? So it really needs to start with us. But also, state capture has shown us. I'm fully aligned We need a capable state that's professional, that's educated. But the major characteristics of state capture were not bureaucrats who were not qualified. They were actually highly qualified, highly respected, highly experienced. They had earned a lot of accolades. But what happened? This character of the human being. So this is really what we are dealing with, and this is really what we need to confront as we speak of building a capable, ethical, and a developmental state. And if we do not confront this effectively, as we tighten our policies, our laws, and we bring ethics to the center of our legislative framework, then we are really going to struggle with building this capable and developmental state. Now, when you look into Chapter 10 of our constitutions, which speaks of the critical principles that we need to govern public administration. And I want to say, public administration at a provincial and national level, the stringency is a big. Where our failures are and where we concur with the AG and the public protector is that it is actually at the coalface of service delivery, municipalities. Now, these spheres of government need to speak to one another because governance is governance, the state is the state. So if we don't look into professional ethics broadly, resource efficiency, one thing we miss is that when there's constraints in resources, the first thing we say, less on training, less on development. What does it do? The less people are trained and developed within their areas of work, what happens to the confidence within which they approach that work? It does count because you need to be a confident bureaucrat in order to stand your ground. So when we speak of the efficiency of our resources, this really affects the area around our development. Further, we are speaking of fiscal leaks as a country. Our biggest target is the wage bill of public servants. Is that really our challenge? Is it really the wage bill of public servants? We don't want to confront the elephant in the room. It is maladministration and corruption. The public protector, the auditor general, PSC would have the data at our disposal that in fact the biggest challenge in our country is the money that is maladministered. It is the corruption. It is money that is siphoned out of the state coffers. That is where the fiscal leaks are. And until we deal with that real corruption, we will continue to be confronted with a fiscus that is actually shrinking each and every time. I'm going to give you an example. We did an investigation into the Lesserton Stadium, infamously known as the stadium in Queenstown, the Enoch Mgijima Stadium. What we found in Enoch Mgijima, and is what we find generally, and that is where the problem is. One, irregular appointments of those who must administer state affairs. And these irregular appointments are actually intentional. What we found is that maladministrators were moved from Makana municipality, having committed maladministration, but because they are not charged, you see, they are not facing any disciplinary. They move to Enoch Mgijima. They continue and perpetuate the same maladministration, achieve what they're supposed to achieve. They're actually promoted into another municipality. And when we look into the affairs of that municipality, we see the very same pattern. Now, is that not intentional? And these people, there's a pair. The one is promoted as a MM, the one is promoted as the head of SCM. Now, is that not intentional to commit corruption? Because the pattern is very clear. The AG's reports about the functioning of these individuals is very clear from the areas in which they come from. So we see an intentional pattern. irregular appointments, and when you are irregularly appointed, it is very clear that you are headhunted to commit maladministration and corruption. What leg are you going to have to stand on to fight against any maladministration or instruction to maladminister? Now, what does this translate to? Irregular procurement. What happens in the irregular procurement? And the private sector plays a crucial role in corruption in the state, and we need to be vocal about this. The company is appointed, it didn't have money in its accounts, it's awarded the contract, money is deposited from the state coffers into the account. But what does this money do? It doesn't pay for anything that is related to the building of the stadium. Out of about 22 million, about 9 million is withdrawn in cash. Now, even if there's profits, hey, what profit is this? How many percent of the 22 million is this that this company withdraws in cash? And where does this money go to? We don't ask ourselves, but where is our problem? Do we test the integrity of business that's doing business with the state when in our procurement systems? Now, this is one of the remedial actions that the public protector has taken, and I mean, we've been taken on review. We'll see what the courts say, but this is what we are willing to fight in order to build an ethical state. Business that's doing business with the state must pass an integrity test. Firstly, has this business efficiently and effectively delivered for the state? It is not sufficient to say on paper, I've been awarded this contract, it's done, but there is no test as to how it has been done. Has it served or is it serving the people of South Africa? Because this is state money. If you are doing business with the state, you must deliver for the people. Secondly, what are the financial affairs of business that's doing business with the state? If you are a business that does business with the state that can withdraw 9 million, where is that money going to? There is no evidence of material bought. There is no evidence of staff or contractors being paid. Where is that money going to? The same way that we are looking at money laundering within the financial system and everywhere else, we need to look at that and apply the same risk-based principles into the affairs of those who are dealing with the state. Until we confront it for what it is, we will not be able to answer effectively of how far we are. Yes, there are certain strides that have been made. We look at councillors that are being killed across the country. What we found in Enoch Mgijima is a councillor having signed a completion certificate. Honorable Maimane spoke about the level of education of councillors, but be as it may, in the Municipal Systems Act, in the MFMA, but also in the Code of Conduct of Councillors, nowhere does a councillor have a duty to be involved in the procurement system, and let alone to be signing a completion certificate. What credentials do they have to authorize that the building has been completed and it is of the qualified standards? We've also taken remedial action around that area. Then we need to tighten the law, but we also need to tighten around the code of conduct of councillors. But most importantly, where do we lack? If you move from one municipality to another, and it's later found out that you've committed maladministration, you can't be disciplined by the next municipality. There's no law in our country for that. Officials move. Officials move from municipalities to provincial and national government, and thereafter they say, but there's no authorizing legal framework to deal with this particular person. The first person who must uphold accountability and oversight would be the one to say so. Why are we leaving this gap open? Is it intentional? Because we know that it is a problem for our country. It actually hinders on consequence management. What has the public protector done in this respect? We said, the state is the state. Which other state do you work for? Which other fiscus have you siphoned money from? It is from the one state, and therefore we should be able to effect consequence management. We will really hear what the courts have to say about that, but we really hope that it is a step in the right direction in building an ethical and a capable state. Because once maladministrators and corrupter and corruptees know that there is no corner or room to hide, we will at least be a step forward to do that. We'll be able to enforce accountability, transparency, and be able to utilize the resources effectively. We need to build blocks of reforms. Major challenges in our country, the IMF reports, the World Bank reports tell us, we do not implement reforms. Are the reforms not there? They are there. Several of the oversight institutions actually take remedial actions and recommendations and hand it over to the state. Are they being implemented? State has conferencing all the time, speak of structural governance and all sorts of reforms that must be implemented. Are they ever implemented? Seldomly, very slowly implemented. And once they are implemented, is there monitoring for maintenance of those systems? Because that is important. It is not sufficient to say, we've effected arrests. One thing that Advocate Batoyi normally says and most criticize for is when she says, you can't prosecute corruption away. And that is true. What does it do to the criminal justice ecosystem? Prisons would be full. What is going to happen? Corruption is going to perpetuate. To prosecute a corruption case, we know, takes no less than 10 years in our country, some even more. What happens? People then say, there's no law, it continues. But we need to deal with it from inceptions. We need to build strong systems. But also, we need to ensure that finances that are acquired through fraudulent and corrupt means are not sustainable. So our asset and state asset recovery system, and I think the SIU and the AFU are actually doing well in that. And that is really work in the right direction. But the sobering reality that we need to face is the trust and capacity deficit that the state faces as a result of the perpetuation of unethical conduct. I mean, trust just in government, in the Endelman Trust Barometer in 2025 shows only 36%. Yes, it is a 7% rise from the previous year, but what does it say? It says that the citizens are more inclined to take the law into their own hands. We're more inclined to see major challenges and less people participating in the democratic processes like we've seen in the last democratic elections. Now, what do we need? We need proficiency beyond technical competence. We need values transformation. We need competency development. We need institutional insulation. We need to ensure that institutions and those who are holding positions in institutions are more independent. And that independence, particularly, Prof. Nkuna, you would know between the administrative and the political interface. What is the independence of the DGs and HODs from the political leadership? I listened to a clip of one of the members in parliament addressing that we need to have lifestyle audits in SCM. The first thing when a politician arrives in a department as an executive authority, they are approached by SCM, Chief, what can we do for you? What do you want? Now, where immediately it's to capture, you know? But those are the major challenges that we go through. I'm going to tell you of a story, of something that happened in front of me. It's like a story, and I tell it all the time. When there's an administration that was appointed in KZN, not the current one, the one before this. So I was sitting at a foyer at a hotel, working, and then a group of men came in, and yes, men, you know, walked in, and they sat just adjacent to me, not too far, and there were other people in the hotel. But they started discussing the names of the politicians who had just come in a week before. And what mandate has so-and-so given? And these are business people. What mandate has been given? What needs to be done? And how do we continue to take care of so-and-so? Now, so-and-so is here. We need to continue to take care. So-and-so has given us the mandate. Now, if that is not capture that we are speaking of, and these are things that we think don't happen, they don't exist, but that's actually where captures happen, not necessarily in state corridors, but how they influence state corridors. So how do we insulate those who, by the way, who've been entrusted with the constitutional responsibility? I'm going to go on to the last case, which I want to make an example with, which is our major challenge as a country and why we're unable to move as fast as we should. It is the issue of cooperative governance. How many times when somebody doesn't want to take action and responsibility do they say, it is not my responsibility, it's the responsibility of local government, and there's no enabling legislation? We've seen that in the Hammanskraal water case. It took us 5 years as the public protector to resolve the case. Initially, we thought we would resolve it amicably, but none of the state role players wanted to budge and take responsibility. All they wanted to do was to go and amend the legislation. Where are the people at that time? What's going to happen? So people must not have water and wait for 5 years for the processing of legislation, when the Constitution, Section 41, is very clear on interdependence and cooperative governance. And that's why we've got cooperative governance. But if people don't want to take responsibility, they easily hide behind the lack of legislation. So it's how do we use the Constitution as a center of the capability of our state and ensure that we deliver based on that. But also, we need to ensure that there's a clear vision and direction. There must be evidence-driven and evidence approach to decision-making. Effective, well-governed institutions, targeted policy interventions, capable energy and foresight, social impacts and partnerships, coherence and coordination, regular reviews and adaptation. But we do reviews, but we never do evaluation and assessment of why are we amending this legislation? What is it that has failed us? And more often, what fails us is the lack of available resources to fully implement legislation. And we go thereafter and we develop new legislation without having had fully implemented that legislation. What is the new legislation going to assist us with? Again, we are not going to have resources. It's training to prepare people even before the legislation come into play. We take 5 years to develop legislation, and then we take another 2 years for regulation, and then we take another 5 years to build capacity. By that time, we are reviewing the legislation again. Where are we ever going to get to as a country? So with those practical examples, I am really saying that we need to measure our successes as a country. Yes, there are areas in which we have made progress, but the picture of where we are at is not a gloomy one. Personal leadership philosophy needs to be at the center of the leaders of this country. It is a constitutional oath that we are taking to the people of South Africa. It is not personal enrichment, but also it is not party-based. Professional excellence and ethical conduct should not be negotiable. Collaborative oversight can achieve more sustainable results than punitive approaches. Transformation requires patience for long-term institutional change, combined with urgency for immediate improvements. But more than anything, we require public servants who've got the courage to implement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pipi. So, if the number of people who have trust in government is as indicated, it may mean that only those who are here and their families have trust in government. So, hear me out. If the number is at that level, and you check the number of people who are in government and their dependents, it means that the people who have trust in government is us. not the people out there. So it's something that we need to explore. When we say 26 people trust government, have trust in government, we must ask questions. In fact, who are those people? Because it may turn out that it is those of us who are in government who trust the work that we do. So that's one thing to ponder. The other thing to ponder is we thought by coming with regulations, DG Vukela, that focus on stemming corruption, we focus on instructions from above. Now we are confronted with a new reality from below, where capture happens from below. Where as DJs, there are many tenders that are issued. You sometimes don't even know because of the delegations and the way we've constructed the system. But let's move on, Prof. James. So Confucius in ancient China says, "He who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool, don't follow him." Now, here's a problem. The person who knows not and knows not that he knows not can't accept that he knows not and knows not that he knows not. So you are faced with a dilemma that this person that you must avoid because he knows not that he knows not refuses when you say you know not that you know, something along those lines. But let me welcome Prof. James, who may even use this opportunity to share some of the things that we see in the United States of America. We always believe that you always have people who know that they know. But it's now clear that it may happen even at that stage, that you may have people who know not that they know not. So over to you. You may sit there. It's up to you, Prof. Either way. Thank you.
Well, now, after that introduction, maybe if you know nothing, you know everything. I'm not quite sure. Well, distinguished public officials, Sampan leadership, my distinguished colleagues on the podium, thank you for inviting me. I come to you from California. I come a long way. I'm a guest in many ways, a guest to your country, a guest to your organization, and certainly a guest in terms of meeting you and getting to know all of you. My father said that guests had requirements. They were to be quiet, they were to be mannerly, and they were to leave soon. Well, I must apologize. I may not be able to do any of those things. I'm not going to be quiet. Hopefully I'm mannerly, but I'm staying for 42 days. So I'm here for your convention, and I will be teaching at Northwest University and visiting a number of other places while I'm here. Well, you may wonder why someone was invited from so far away. And in fact, I'm going to nominate myself for an award. I think I've come the furthest of all the people who have come to the meeting. I think I make that. Secondly, I'm the person who's come here with the most to learn. There's a great deal to learn in public policy everywhere in the world. I'm a comparative scholar. I look at different countries, different organizations, how they serve and support their own societies and do things that are necessary to make those societies better. Well, this is not my first time with you. 11 years ago, I was at Limpopo University. I taught for a month in the public policy program there with my colleague, Professor Fago. And then I spent some time in Pretoria with a number of your distinguished academics, government officers, and some others, helping to put together 27 graduate programs in public policy. I understand a number of those have been very successful in the time since. When we kicked off that program, and I would point out my distinguished colleague, Professor Massimo Marullo, was on the podium then. He is a bright light in your pantheon. In fact, so bright, I thought when I was going to meet with him again, maybe I should bring sunglasses so I wouldn't be blinded. He is a master at deconstruction. One of his favorite phrases, well, once again, I should apologize, I'm a lawyer. I'm a master at construction, or at least I attempt construction. I take ideas, put together, and try to make arguments for where you go, what you do. But those 27 programs that were put together were designed to build a competent, successful, and very large professional management program that provided you with the German word Beamter, the bureaucrats, people who could work in organizations, work in agencies, sometimes build those agencies from a very small stature to something much larger. Let's see, I think I have my slides here, and we'll talk about that for just a moment. The idea was to develop proficiencies in agencies that were very small, sometimes undermanned, where people would understand particularly data collection, understand data analysis, and understand the planning process. When I gave the keynote address 11 years ago about those programs, I talked a great deal about ethics, and I've noticed that of the things I've heard in the last 2 days, ethics are paramount to where you're going. You're focusing on ethics, realizing how important that is, and how that serves to make a successful bureaucratic force and create new management exercises. As I understand South African history, the greater portion of the population here, the black population in South Africa, was not considered part of the country in the old administration. In the pre-majority government, if you were to ask, for example, and I notice water has been of high discussion here, if you were to ask a hydrology specialist how far the average South African lived from potable water, the answer would be, I could tell you how far the average urban South African lived from potable water, but I couldn't tell you about 90% of the population. Where they were, how they were distributed, where the resources were, that was not part of the governmental structure. So upon assuming majority rule, if you were going to have a successful, effective, efficient operation in the government, you needed to know data about your citizens. You needed to know who they were, where they were, what they had, what they didn't have. And of course, creating this large bureaucracy very quickly was going to be difficult. We will note that bureaucracy is a French word, le bureau. And the French, who are famous for their bureaucracy, and it is very good. I've lived in France. I've taught in France for a while. They took them 1,000 years to develop it. It took a long time. It's an experiential process in its development. And that development has many unique facets because it took such a long time. When you develop something out of experience, you can take what you learn, what you know about the process. You can take what you don't know about the process, as my distinguished moderator would say, and you can build corrective measures based upon trying to cure particular problems you discover along the way. Well, when you have to build for a nation of nearly 70 million people a large bureaucracy that's effective and develop this almost instantaneously, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn from your experiences. Some of that learning is going to be very quick. Some you're going to try many solutions to be able to solve problems and work your way over time. Well, in building curriculum, and what I'm really here to talk about, believe it or not, building curriculum in those 27 programs and others, you've got a number of things you want to look at, which will include the development of a professional level of public administration, which I've certainly seen here. How to manage teams in government, how to develop large teams that can do problem solving very quickly, and to understand populations and respond to public needs. Now, there is a national review of curriculum in your public policy programs. And when I was asked to look at curriculum review, it's a very large, obviously, a very extensive problem that has to be dealt with. Building new programs at individual universities and individual colleges and departments of public administration, public policy, political science, and so forth. And of course, there are various competing needs. There are certain subject areas that you want to focus on. You want to build this professional force that has to have the requisite skills to be able to do the jobs you're talking about. Something I had not thought about before coming and listening to the other panelists the last few days is that you're also building skills among elected officials. Now, I tend to think about professionals in the field only, and that's my focus, what I was looking at. But certainly, as you are developing your country, as you are building your professional base, you are doing it with the working folks who are inside of public administration, but you're also developing your elected officials to be more sensitive, more understanding, more creative, and, if I may say so, more professional. Well, as we do that, of course, we are looking at those public servants, who they are, where they're going, and that's obviously part of the preparation that the curriculum has to take in mind. Developing a dedication to public service. Now, obviously, that's for the professionals and for those who are going to run for office and be involved in the political process. Understand the need for responsible bureaucracy, and of course, develop a sense of the common good. Now, all of those things are going to be important in terms of the curriculum review, but in particular, I want to focus, and I have a small proposal to make. It's not terribly significant, but perhaps useful as a model for you, in that those 27 programs were developed specifically for your administrative services. So we're talking about developing programs where you took, I guess for 5 years or so, the first 5 years, you took people who were the very top in their field. They were very good at what they did, and they were given the privilege of graduate education. The government paid for the education, what we call in my system the free ride. Take off for 2 years, go get your education, we will pay for it, we will pay your salary. You have to agree to stay with us for 5 years, 10 years, what have you, after you finish your education. You can't go off to the banks and the other places, law firms and such, but you have to stay with the government in service. Other folks were given programs where they got Tuesday and Thursday afternoons off. They could go to school. You get your courses done. You bring us back a good grade, and you get reimbursed. So those people are in the program. They're part of it. They're part of your building of a professional staff. Well, what I'm recommending is that the curriculum study that's going on start with those 27 programs, since they were specifically developed toward the public service in South Africa, and a survey be made of those people. Now, survey research is it's useful in a lot of ways. We heard from your chief number cruncher yesterday, and I thought it was very interesting getting the statistics. I learned a great deal about South Africa, but I also learned a good deal about the professional understanding of statistical analysis and how that can be used in the development of your process and reviewing of your policy guidelines. Well, it's also useful in terms of the curriculum review itself. To survey those people who are in these very specific programs is extremely useful. Survey research has some weaknesses. Of course, the big weaknesses is response. If you can get 20 to 25% of people responding to your survey, that's success. Now, if you played soccer and you got 25% of the goals that you were achieving, the coach would fire you. He wants you to do a lot better than that. So survey research is weak in the sense that you can't get responses. Well, having these 27 graduate programs with people assigned to the government who are graduates of those programs solves part of that problem. We know where they are, we know what they do, and we could look at their career progression. So since graduating, if I know what you've done, I know what your specialty is, and I can look at your career progression, getting the response back is very important because it's not random. It's very focused on the application of the skills you learn and where you've gone. Since you work for the government, we of course can be sure to get a much higher sense of response. We know where you are. We give the survey to your boss, and it's passed out, and you're given a couple of hours. Let's respond to this. Give us back the information, and we can know that that we're getting this from the people who are appropriate towards our survey, the objects of our instrument. And of course, finally, the last thing, the weakness of survey research, is people don't really care. They're ticking the boxes. It doesn't really mean anything. It's when you send out, for example, your survey instruments on population analysis in general and your population counts. Well, people will answer how many people live in the household, how many windows are in the house. They answer it, it's quick, they put it away, it's done. Well, having the survey research pointed toward those people who are graduates of the 27 programs allows us to ask them very detailed questions and get information such as, when you graduated and went to your first assignment, what skills did you need that you were not given in graduate schools? What skills did you learn that were important in where you went, where you were assigned, what you had to do? And of course, some of the people who graduated 11 years ago, they're going to be successful, they're going to be directors of offices, and they're going to be able to tell us not only what they learned and how it was applied, but what they have seen along the way in terms of solving problems and working in the various programs they had. Well, that's really all I have in terms of my offer and why it is that I was asked to look at this. I was here before, helped build those programs. I looked at some of the curriculums 11 years ago, and now I think we have a good chance to go back, review those, and before we turn generally to all of the public policy programs in the country, those particular 27 that were focused toward the government, built for the government and by the government, would be very useful to analyze and have as a model for where we go beyond that. Now, if I can beg the indulgence of our moderator and take just a moment, I'd like to make a comment about the first night and the keynote speakers that were going on. I wasn't asked to do that. But since all four speakers talked about the United States and the comparison between the United States and South Africa, I thought it would be useful for me to respond. I am here as a Fulbright professor from the United States working on this particular project. But, and I'm a lawyer as well. As I said, I did apologize for that. You know, lawyers do a lot of bad things. Lawyers are somewhat like economists, I suppose. They know the cost of everything, the value of nothing. Well, I truly appreciate, and I'm an international lawyer. I teach law of land warfare, national security decision-making. The focus on the international responsibilities of statehood, the focus on the rule of law, in the keynote addresses, the history, comparing the United States and South Africa, I think was absolutely wonderful. The use of our basic document, the Declaration of Independence. Our Creator gave us human rights, individual rights. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We have not lived up to that. That is in our basic document. It is what our credo is. It is what we're designed to do. We haven't always lived up to that. And we in particular have not lived up to that in our relations over the centuries with Africa. And having you see the parallels, looking at, for example, Field Marshal Smuts and Mr. Wilson in the great liberal movement of the beginning of the 20th century into the 19th century, and his teachings and how they reacted and operated in the international sphere and not in their own countries. I think it's very important to understand and to see where we're united. So I did want to say that and did want to offer that. I would offer as a final comment that when the nation began in 1910, you were the Union of South Africa from the USA. Well, I'm from the United States, which is also the USA, but the one exactly on the other side of the country. And I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here and be with you for these few days. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Prof. I allowed the first three panelists to say a lot more than the time allocated because they are our guests. And the following panelists are home-based. So I will draw the time that I gave that other side from the home-based. Prof. Masrimon, let's talk politics a bit, because sometimes in these corridors, we are afraid to do so, which is not what we should be doing. The president of the ANC says to his members, the councillors, go and learn from others in the same space, more or less. And it became a very big issue, complex issue, where I had, at least depending on who you follow on Twitter, so don't make a judgment on what I'm going to say. We saw some South Africans saying that, no ways, you can't tell us to go and learn from those ones. We can't, you know? And others saying the opposite, of course. Now, what does that mean? Maybe it may mean that on the face of it, in public domains, people will articulate that, and then at night go and learn from each other. It may be happening. The mayor of Tshwane is here. Welcome, Mayor. So I think the question is the extent to which the public service is massively a political enterprise than anything else, where political correctness, political tribes are more important than anything else in the public service, such that we have a situation whereby, because of that, we find it very offensive to can be told to learn from each other. And it has got nothing whether, I'm not making a case on who is good or who's bad, but the mere sentiment of saying that you can't tell us to go and learn from those ones, that must not even be said. Is that suggesting that we are running more of a political enterprise than an economic and other things? They end up being subordinate, such that the nature of the political economy of South Africa is weighted more on the political than on the economy, and whether it's possible to reconstruct an equilibrium which balances the political and the economic. If you could also deal with that. I've already dealt with the time issues that I allowed our guests more time so we can, so that we can also have time for the colleagues here. Okay.
Good morning. It's typical of bureaucrats who retire before their time. I expected that question, which basically says that I must respond directly to the president. And it's a bit of a challenge because in my other life, I'm in the National Planning Commission, and I was appointed by the very same president that I'm going to respond to. But my training, I think, has adequately equipped me with the skill to indeed provide an answer. Good lesson shouldn't really have a political identity. It must have an educational value. Where you get educational value, you must go. Perhaps the debate, probably, it was about, or the debate should be about how people were told to go and learn from others. The problem is not the lesson. The problem could possibly be about how they were told to go and learn from others. And that is the problem. That is their problem. It's not our problem. Our problem is that people must go and learn and facilitate the development of a capable state. And since the beginning of this conference, a consistent message, and perhaps let me also, when I say this, I get reminded of what Professor Chilisi Marwala consistently say, that if you cannot lead, you cannot, if you cannot read, you cannot lead. And we need to take it further that it's not just simply about reading, it is about trying to acquire as much knowledge as possible. But it doesn't end there. Apply the knowledge, right? Because the challenge that we have in the country, and some of the issues emerged yesterday, and I'm glad that this is a continuation of that wonderful discussion that we had yesterday, that we tend to conflate professionalism or professionalization with credentialism. Right? You can have as many degrees as possible until such time that those degrees add value. For you to also add value to society, they mean nothing. And that goes back to us as the professors. We asked the question at some point, Prof. Nguna and Busani, in one of the articles where we were insulted. Are the university responding to the development needs of the country? Because when you ask that question, the issue is not really about the type of the student that you are producing. The issue is about us as professors. Are we teaching what we are supposed to teach? The issue of ethics has been a dominant issue in our discussion, and I'm glad that we are talking about it. But there is something which is very odd, Prof, in South Africa, which I've observed. I'm in the higher education space. I know what is happening. As we put together our curriculum, we appeared to have missed another important fundamental purpose of education, which is character formation. We tend to focus only on developing cognitive and technical competence. And in the process, we lose the character formation. And that is why we are missing it. We had a Zondo Commission in South Africa. I made my business to watch it, and I watched it. People that appear before the Zondo Commission to explain themselves for things that they did. Brilliant, technically competent people, ethically bankrupt. That is where the issue is. That is where the issue is. And it is our responsibility, and I'm glad Robert, I call him Robert sometimes because he's my friend, and I'm glad that you also clarify one important issue about the state. Because sometimes, as the university, when things goes wrong, we get out of our responsibility and consistently blame government. Let me give you an example. At some point, I was in a very odd radio interview. The talk essentially was about how government is failing to develop the National Development Plan. And I was in a panel of my peers, the professors, talking about how government is failing. Yes, there are so many challenges that you're confronted with. My issue was not about the extent to which government is failing in terms of certain responsibility. My issue was how the whole discourse was framed. Because here we are talking about government which is part of the state, failing to implement a national plan. My worry was that the whole discourse did not appreciate the significance of national. Because the moment when we talk about the National Development Plan, I am part of the national as a university. And the National Development Plan is very clear that come a particular period, I can't remember exactly, South Africa should have produced so much PhD. Should we expect the mayor to come and supervise our PhD student? Should we expect the president? Here we are talking about the National Development Plan. All what I'm trying to say is that also as ourselves, we have got a bigger role to play in terms of making sure that we drive a developmental stage. So, at the end of the day, program director, I am battling with this question, public protector. Is the issue in our country really about lack of competence, or the issue is about corruption, as you eloquently put it? Because if you analyze how certain things that are wrong happen, there is a high level of competence in terms of orchestrating that. An extraordinary level of competence in terms of orchestrating that. So I don't really think that the issue is competence. The issue goes back to how we teach these people character formation. It must underpin everything, right? At some point where I work, where I draw my salary, I say that, and I'm glad that the chairperson, is it time? You see. Okay, let me just finalize this point. It's so unfair. Let me just finalize this point. And he is correct that when you see the younger leadership in our university, they are starting to learn certain things that they should not learn. And at some point, I say that we need to have perhaps a cut across a module on ethics that will target specifically these future leaders. Because by not doing that, unwittingly and unfortunately, we are investing in people that will later turn out to be corrupt. Because they learn how to master the art of corruption. And it's a pity that this cohort, the young people, are the one that you should actually try as much as possible as a country to invest in. Hey, somebody at some point said to me that why do I always seems like I give preference to young people when certain opportunity arises? And I'll tell you why. Whether we like it or not, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution. The extent to which things are happening would not need an ordinary me and Prof. Makanya. We are there to give guidance. But people that will make things happen are these people. They call them the digital natives. Because the world is now increasingly being shaped by technology. I might be aware of technology. I can talk eloquently about it, but there are those who practice it. And largely those people are the younger people. So when we talk about building a capable state, also the question of technology becomes critically important. We finalized a report not long time ago, and the findings were not really that much encouraging in terms of the extent to which our public service is technologically skilled. That is another point that I wanted to make a chairperson. And because now you are chasing me. I'm just going to say the last point about professionalization. When we were working on the framework on professionalization, we studied the constitutions of 15 countries. And the findings were very interesting, that our constitution was one of the best in terms of a solid foundation for us to professionalize. Chapter 10, those are the principles of professionalization. And by the way, those principles did not actually originate in 1996 when we adopted that constitution. They were part of the discussion about the formation of the post-apartheid state. If you remember, there was Principle 34. Remember the negotiating process agreed on certain principles that must shape the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And that Principle 34 is the one that ultimately shaped the structure and the logic of Chapter 10 in the Constitution. The very first principle talk about a career public service based on meritocracy. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Okay, I'm doing this. I'm your protector. So there's a public protector, and then there's a protector of the audience, so that you can have some time to engage with the speakers. So I'm just appointed myself to be your protector. But just maybe one question. The most difficult question that has ever been asked in history comes today. Who, in their student days, ever participated in looting? In looting the cafeteria? Let's be honest. Whoever participated? No, because they say that the beginning of wisdom is by calling things by their true names. So let's try something so that we must be true to what we are saying. So Oliver Mtukudzi say what you mean and mean what you say. Ne? So that's Oliver Mtukudzi, the Zimbabwean musician. So I'm asking a question. Who participated, whoever, this is not being recorded, whoever participated in looting the cafeteria? Okay. Yeah, okay, let's leave it at that. Now, two issues to the last speaker. The one is what the public protector says, that in business, there's been a shift from rules to risk. Whether it's possible to adopt the same approach in the public sector, where we move away from rules to. Then the last one is, we talk about bridging the gap between theory and practice. Let's move one step backward. What are we talking about? What happens is having this conference on annual basis, all what we do to bridge the gap between academia and practice, so that we move away from slogans. You know, slogans are very easy to coin. So let's deal with that issue of, can government move from the same logic, from rules to risk management? And number two is, what do we mean by bridging the gap between theory and practice? It sounds attractive, but no one ever says what it is. That when we meet next year, what are we going to report on what it is that is being done? So I'm asking that we move away from the slogan, attractive as it is, to now some pathway that deals with this issue of bridging the gap between the two. So those are the two issues. If you can focus on that, I know you are prepared to deal with other issues, but I want the audience also to interact with the speakers. So as a home girl in Sapam, you will assist me in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. A very good morning. Sanbonani nonke kulolu suku lamaciko ethu. Thank you so much to the speakers before me. and a very wonderful Heritage Day. I think, being the last person to speak, you are often disadvantaged because most of the things would largely be having said by other panelists. No, we did not speak about the dress code with the public protector, fellow panelist. You see, when people of the same discourse think, I think the thinking lines become almost the same in most of the things. Program director, I think the question of bridging the gap is extremely important. And perhaps I want to put this into perspective based on my experience as a public servant, because that's what I regard myself as. And when I immersed myself to work within the sphere, I understood that it couldn't be business as usual. Something needed to change once I started ascending to senior management positions. And the change needed to start with me. Being a late learner, one often saw the bankruptcy in the institution of public service regarding the real core component of your being in the institution and having to immerse yourself in continuous growth. I'm saying this because often the view whilst I was undertaking the studies was that you do not belong here. Please go to academia because you are certainly disrupting how we are functioning. We have certain protocols and you are a senior manager. You can't have time to study. And yet we had policies. So clearly, those who were making the policies didn't even understand what the policies meant. There needed to be a shift in gear because we were in gear 1. I think gear 5 needed to be where we are at if we were deliberate about a public service which is responsive to the needs of the people. Now, I think I needed to say that because as some of us continue to immerse ourselves in trying to bridge this gap, it's foreign to our colleagues within the public sector because having deliberately wanting to shift the status quo, I felt that the area of academia gave me appropriate weapons to go to this war in the most appropriate manner. And in this regard, I saw some light at the end of the tunnel that we were all in as public service. And I think in that regard, I want to assure you that there is hope. The state is hopeful that change is but imminent. But let me speak from the daily realities where municipalities either succeed or collapse. I have seen both, and the difference between the two is never abstract. It comes down to the ecosystem that needs to exist within government and governance explicitly. And competent technical staff who can actually do the work, consequence management that bites when people fail or steal, because that's what it is, political oversight that is about service delivery, not patronage, and communities, including the traditional institution, which is now becoming more and more immersed in ensuring that local government, because it's at the coalface of administration, is assisted in realizing the service delivery, because that is the bottom line. All of what we have been speaking about in the past few days, and we will be engaging on in the papers that we are to deliver, are we going to realize service delivery for our people? Because they are impatient now, and they have seen that the state is taking its time, and the processes are not being concluded. And unless we confront it honestly, state capacity will remain a conference theme, not a lived reality. And I think I want to really ponder on the political administrative interface, because that was part of the passion in my leaning onto academia to weaponize me positively, of course, to be able to drive the agenda. Because we, within the system, need to drive the agenda deliberately. And when I understood that every time I got to say what I thought needed to be done, it became not as seriously taken. I felt that perhaps if I had some backup in terms of qualifications, then it would seem relevant. And indeed, it played that role. And it's unfortunate, but it's fortunate at the same time, because that's how things really should be. So in line with having to understand administration and how it works, you need to have a strategy in enforcing, because it's about enforcement. And I think as public servants, we downplay the role that we have in championing the agenda of service delivery as an output ultimately. The performance managements, the assessments, the monitorings, and the evaluations are there, are processes that have to assist us in ensuring that ultimately the goal is delivery at its core. I want to also refer to the skills audit that was undertaken in KZN, wherein it became the premise of indicative turnaround strategy for the province as a whole, because in this regard, we were able to also absorb the councillors of the fact that they are part of the problem, and we therefore need to tackle it as a front and as a unit rather than being disjunctured. And we certainly saw the change, because if you look at the audit outcomes, those municipalities which, when we were now analyzing, using the data to analyze, those municipalities who had a majority of councillors that were educated and a majority of officials that had relevant skills in relevant positions, because that's where the mismatch was, were able to hold the fort better than those municipalities who had councillors that could not read and write, and also administrators who were either not qualified to be in the positions that they were in, but also the disparities in the administration that they were facilitating. I think for me, some jobs cannot be left for chance. We cannot have someone without the requisite skills championing strategic positions, and that's what it is. And also, we spoke here about the resource balancing in the academic discourse, because some of the machineries that are in place in this regard, the skills units within that are put in place by government, do not tackle the gap that is there. The resources for some of the institutions are not confronting the actual gaps that are existing, and this should be something that is looked at. Let me speak to some of the solutions that I'm recommending as academia in terms of having to balance the academic output based on what is the gaps on the ground. And I'm hoping, and I saw that SAPAM is immersing itself in a new approach wherein the responses from the commissions are collated towards the presentation to government. And this is an opportune time, President, as we are immersing on the professionalization of the public service. We've signed MOUs with institutions like SAPAM, and we really need to take the agenda of enforcing what government needs to do as the academia. So for me, it's about the dashboards in terms of what must be presented. And you could start in KZN as a first province, given the fact that we do have a footing of the strategy which commands at a national level. So for me, I think the inclusion of that in the traditional component and the arm of administration has already begun as a case study in KZN. 50 Amakosi are with UKZN. understudying leadership, because that is also the gap we had realized. So the 12 million is not a wasteful and fruitless expenditure, because when we understood that they also need to be an active partner, they needed to come to the institution to understudy the correct way, rather than to give them a course and then say thank you for attending. So for me, these are interventions that I think are tangible and have quick turnaround times, because the research that the Amakosi do are on their actual space and areas which they can go back and implement. Others have already started implementing, and we are monitoring them and holding their hand. And for me, this is the ecosystem that needs to be realized. And I hope that we also, as academia, do research based on the state of local government. I don't know how many of us know that on a yearly basis, each province assesses the functionality of local government, and there are key thematic challenges that come out of that. And I would wish that institutions of higher learning do the research based on that to assist us as government to champion and close the gaps with the interventions and the recommendations that would have been an output of your research. I think I want to stop there because we can then interact more. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Just a quick marketing gimmick from my side, unmandated by the SAPAM leadership. Public Protector. This get-together happens on annual basis. It's made possible by the support that SAPAM receives from DPMA, DPSA, the PCETA, help me, the National School of Government, the Public Service Commission. Now, the attempt is to create a melting pot of ideas. To spend the whole week, there will be many papers. In fact, many have been presented up to now. So the Public Protector is also allowed to join as a supporting partner of SAPAM, so that we make this more vibrant, more serious, and that we publish the outcomes of the papers and some of the deliberations in book form, for further consumption. That also extends to the city of Tshwane. The fact that we meet in different places does not mean that you can't be a partner of SAPAM. So you can be a partner of SAPAM even when some events take place in other provinces. Because the main idea is to bring all ideation into one space. So on behalf of SAPAM, I'm making a request that the Public Protector join us as part of this family, the same with the city of Tshwane. And with the Public Protector, obviously, we'll take the issue around shift from rules to risk and get some of the colleagues who are here to work with the office on some ideas on how that can be done in practice, so that when we meet next time, yeah. So some round of applause for me for getting 2 members. Okay, so colleagues, I have been defending you, and I'm still doing that. So let me open the floor so that we can get an opportunity to engage, particularly with those who are not always with us. So let's start here. Anyone wishes to speak, to compliment? Okay, let's start with Vukela. Just breaking the ice. And from DPSA, and Prof. Makanya will follow. And then the president. Let me take these 3, and then I'll come back to others. Continue.
Thank you very much, moderator. What an excellent session, I must say. I've been listening to since the first day of our discussion, moderator. And therefore, in all this discussion session, we really praise our constitution as a document that is widely admired. Don't we think the problem we're facing now is caused by the same constitution? Let's start there. Because we try to look around, we can't find anything, but there's this document that hinges around all issues that we're doing. Can we flip it around and say, perhaps all our problems are caused by the same document? That's number 1. Number two, on that sense, you must define what is the real problem, because I can't find the problem. I've listened to all speakers because everybody who's in the decision-making cell of the state is complaining. The president is complaining. Ministers are complaining. MPs are complaining. Listen to Honorable Maiman is complaining. DGs are complaining. Who must resolve this problem? Thirdly, moderator, are we deploying necessary intervention or solution to resolve our problem? Are we really deploying necessary interventions? I don't believe that South Africa has a drought of skills and competent people. I don't believe. South Africa is very rich. I don't believe that South Africa doesn't have money to resolve our problem. I don't believe. We listen to the AG, the leakage is billions. If those billions are utilized efficiently so, this country will be heaven to live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Prof. Makanya.
No, thank you very much, Program Director. You know, this morning, it's unlike what one would like to refer to, you know, as déjà vu, because you hear about something that would otherwise have crossed your mind, but perhaps did not step back, you know, to listen, you know, to it in that direct sense of the word. But from what we've heard this morning, Program Director, starting with Honorable Dr. Maiman, you know, we talk about driving the capability of the state that is driven by this ethical commitment calculated at ensuring that there will be development at the end of the day. But we do it in a vacuum. I mean, that part really worries me, because I think the point that is seriously making is that we need to perhaps reach a point where we say that let's perhaps stop here and do some reflection, so that what we then address should be pointed at the problem, because unless we name it, we are never going to get anywhere. And so I'm saying this because if then you listen to the line of thought of all the speakers, you know, after Honorable Maimane, the public protector, you know, making it very clear that we do have all these instruments, you know, highlighting the challenges that have confronted us and measures that they're putting in place to ensure that we can actually live happily ever after. So this is actually the aspiration, okay? Listening to Professor James, thinking about the curriculum, you know, what has been put in place, those who've gone through the program, you know, that you had worked on, 27 programs, and then the strategy of following them through, because perhaps that's something that we do not do. To what extent do we then say that with all those who are in the system, what do they learn out of the environment where they get exposed to? And what do we do with that? I mean, there were discussions even in the sessions where we're talking about even the kind of internships, you know, that are being offered. What is the end goal? You know, they're simply there, you know, as some kind of a reaction, or are there as a deliberate kind of effort to address a specific challenge that is confronting us? So we don't seem to be having an idea that holds the center to say this is actually what we are driving, and therefore everything else is going to be anchored here. But I'm saying this deliberately because I want to take us now back to who we are, because I don't think we ever do that when we do reflections. You know, human beings, by definition, are supposed to be thinkers. If they are then supposed to be thinkers, what does the education system do to them? One young person said to me, you know, Professor, the problem really with institutions that are supposed to be teaching, they take away that capacity to think. I mean, that was really a worrying, you know, kind of view that was expressed by a young person, because I wanted to know, what do you mean? They said, you know, immediately when you're in that environment, you are told that it is either this or nothing. So you can't then have your own view that must be expressed here and will be viewed as a matter that is supposed to be taken up. But similarly, this is what we do also within the space where we are. We find that those who are prepared to think are seen to be operating on the margins and therefore disrupting the system. So we never look at the system as something that in any event is supposed to be disrupted if we want to make progress. So why am I saying this? We sit in an environment where whatever question that you ask, we are told that, but look, this is a policy framework. So which means that anything that happens to be outside this framework does not belong here. And therefore, just forget it. Just get out of here. So, which then means that what we are trying to build within our own environment is not to allow those thought processes to yield results that are going to be adding in the environment where we are. So what does that mean at the end of the day? It's because we don't understand who we are in the first instance. That is why then the environment begins to alienate these individuals. But I want to mention something else that perhaps we've not also thought about here. You know, there's this author in the US who talks about a deep state, that in the US there's nothing like democracy. What has happened is that we've experienced a deep state. What is really making reference to is that we have a state on the one hand, but then we have the operators on the other hand. The operators, that's where actually the real action lies. The state is merely there as an instrument that they are operating to deliver the results that they require. Do we perhaps not find ourselves in a situation where we have to say that most probably these are questions that we should be asking ourselves to say, why are we veering off from the anchor? Maybe because we are already in a deep state ourselves. So which will then require us to start moving back and saying to ourselves, how do we then begin to reconstruct what we had always wanted to achieve? But all of it will hinge around the question of ensuring that the kind of human being that we're talking about is that human being who qualifies to be human, not human beings who are aliens, because that's where the starting point should be, so that when we then begin to build, that ethical foundation is what begins to be a result, because then you're not going to have a doubt about who's operating there, because they're not going to be operating outside the space of a human being and what a human being expects of them. So which means we are going to do what? We are going to plant a human being in these individuals so that they don't do things that we least expect out of them. So, I mean, this is a very critical one. So if we can drive that kind of an agenda, we'll be in a better space to achieve what we have to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Prof?
Thank you. I had about 3 questions, but I'll subtract 1 and remain with it. Thank you, colleagues, for the thought-provoking presentations. I won't provide context. I'll go straight to questions. First one, if you get a chance in your life as a practitioner or as an academic, will you recommend the end of the tender system in South Africa? That is the first question. The second question, what would it entail, ideally, to save South Africa from becoming yet another failed African state? Thank you.
Okay. And what does it mean to be a failed state? Because also need to know that not to be one. Let me check if there are two more hands. Sorry, I will not call by name because I can say 1, 2, 3. 4. Yeah, let's wrap with the 4 hands so that we just conclude the whole system. Sissy, with, yeah. Please continue.
Thank you, Doc. Mine, it will be questions and comments. I think.
Not long ones. I allowed Prof. Makanya
Okay.
because of.
They will
of
be
health
short.
reasons.
Brief. I think the first speaker, Honorable Musi.
Dr. Maiman.
Okay. Honorable, I don't know what he wants to be called because in public service we call them honorable. So I don't want to lose my job. Honorable Dr. Musi Maiman. Okay? So
That
the issue,
is
I
fine,
think he
thank you.
addressed the very critical point there because the issue is who should professionalize the executives, elected officials, because currently we complain about or planning a lot to professionalize the administration, and there's nothing in the country talking about professionalizing the EAs. And most of the problems from what we heard that has been said by the speakers, and also some being allegations from Kwanas, I think even the executives must be professionalized, not only us. And Prof. Masrumlo, you spoke about two critical things, and actually all the panelists, about the issue of ethics in the public sector. And the framework actually is very clear in terms of how we need to do that. But the issue, I think, also in how we are going about doing it, it's going to take us backwards to say, and I heard that there was a speaker, I didn't attend, that they say professionalization is going to fail. If we don't do what the framework has recommended and we do what we want and select as government officials, then I support that the framework will fail. I'll give you two areas that I'm worried about. The public protector, the AG, they spoke about very scary things about issues that are happening in the public sector about ethics. If we are going to implement the framework and you ask, I'm talking character formation, Prof. Masrumul, you ask me who's competent, qualified, and ethical, a question, just a question to measure whether I'm ethical or not, I'm gonna pass that interview and I'm gonna get the job. So I think it's an area that we need to look at. UP presented that they design an integrity assessment instrument. Those are some of the things that we need to look at. How can government use that to make sure that we don't allow the chaff to enter the system and we can deal with those who are inside by consequence management. And maybe what we are doing right, as NSG we wrote to the DG head and DBE to say the framework wants you to incorporate ethics in curriculum. They must respond to that. And SAPHAM also, through DPSA, the employer sits at the...
Okay.
Can I finish this one? So that we shouldn't say government is not doing anything. Through the DPSA in the PSCBC, there's a work stream that deals with professionalization there. SAPHAM has a responsibility to make sure that also universities on your side, we also make sure that the curriculum is reviewed and ethics. There shouldn't be a curriculum that is going to be taught to anyone who will join the public service that doesn't talk or help them to build that character. And Prof. Masrumlo, you know that. You need to speak to SEICHI. Qualifications for professionals in the country, your health, your engineers, they've got curriculum standards, qualification standards for designing qualifications. We need to develop some for the public service to make sure that the curriculum is not spoken here. All universities will know, before SAQA approves, we know that ethics are embedded in the curriculum that we design to teach these public servants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You know, when you are a program director, when you fail on time, you become problem director. So let's assist each other in that regard. So what we're doing, we have borrowed some minutes from the next session, but let's still be straight to the point in terms of what we want to say, because it's a continuation of the discussions that we've been having. Next there, please assist me, and then I'll come to you this side to conclude. Okay.
No, thanks, Chair. Well, my question is around, how we should, as a gathering here, start, driving the narrative, a particular narrative, a positive narrative, because when I hear here and nationally, everybody's complaining about everything, and we end up complaining about anything next to us. The Constitution, President is also complaining and everything. So what I think is that we need to find a way of managing the narratives, because that's very, very important, so that it gives us direction, it gives us hope, because if we are hopeless, we're a hopeless nation, we won't go anywhere. Actually, instead of talking about a failed state, we must talk about a failed nation, failed nationhood, a hopeless nation, where we become so hopeless that we lose direction. So that's something that I think we need to avoid, and we start, and we can avoid that by start and generating narratives ourselves, narratives that we can manage ourselves. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next, I think there's another speaker that side. Or is it Dr. Ngobo? Swiso. Doc.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is just based on what the presenters have said without rehashing. What will be able to be done in relation to some of the comments, especially in relation to when we say there is resources that are sufficient into the country, but along the way we find that even the remedial actions that Chapter 9 institution putting ahead, they are not adhered to. Then follow up with the process question of then saying, how do we then ensure that, based on what you have said, Prof, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. But how do we then ensure that we move away from a position of conversation, talking, knowing the problems, knowing the issues, but lacking greatly in the process of effective implementation. We sitting here also, whilst in Pretoria, there is another commission that is taking place, and also whilst state resources also being spent to ensure that there should be some investigations. Someone made a question that I thought I would ask to say, what other professionalization that should be enforced for the executive to ensure that, especially on areas on national ethics, Then lastly, I think to the PP, obviously you took us into confidence when you indicated that in a hotel you had a conversation. Obviously, the business sector propels and continues to push a wrong narrative by capturing from the lowest internal official to the senior official. That having been said, I think the panel can then also assist us in then ensuring that how do we move from talk to then enforcement, even if it means there should be some enhancement in the legislation, we might not get into the change of the constitution, but what we enhance to say if there should be effective implementation of those laws must be done. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Doc. The last speaker. Okay, please.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning. According to me, I think the problem has been identified because there's a lot of research that has been conducted, and to me, the curriculum that has been taught in our university is relevant. But then the reason why we come and talk and nothing is happening, there's no solution, is because we forget the basics. You being an academic or a public servant, you belong to a household. You belong to a society. If all of us in this room, we can go to the ground, work the ground, go to those communities, societies, I think the problem is going to be solved. I'm going to give an example of the question that was raised by the president. I've raised it in one session, and when I raised that question, because I was attending a foundation course of one of the political parties, and then I raised a question to say, I think maybe it's time we learn from this political party. And then people took videos. Maybe they thought they are going to make me trend or they are going to report me. But then I was surprised when I was called to say, do you mind joining the facilitation process of the foundation course? So if I didn't raise those questions, I wasn't going to be identified. So if every one of us in this room can go to the ground, we are going to win the challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to round up one question from my side. So there are certain institutions that are allowed to do certain things and others not. So in government, institutions that collect money are allowed to govern themselves in a particular way. Those that spend in a different way. So if you look at SARS and SIU, because they are bringing money, they are allowed to govern themselves in the way that they want, because they are bringing money. Ne? So anyone who brings money will be allowed to function differently. And those who are not bringing money differently in government. So it's a question of incentives. That because you can't tamper with SARS because it's bringing the golden egg there. But when you look at the expenditure side, the governance of institutions changes there. So we need to talk about that, but let me allow the panelists, starting with Mfundisi, Dr. Honorable Maiman. Yeah, there was a question on which title, so I just use all of them. Over to you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, please
I can
up
hear
a
you.
bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
I
please
can
proceed.
hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Because you use the title Mfundisi, I think it's helpful for me to also confess my sins. Because in confession, hopefully the public protector doesn't get me into trouble. But I do think there are certain things that I need to address directly from a political point of view that hampers the discussion we've been having. The first is that politicians do not fear citizens, which means the political system operates in a consequence-free environment. That must be something at its core that should concern us, because it effectively means that if we hold elections after every 5 years, and then politicians are then incentivized to behave every 5 years, it means in the periods in between, they can do as they please. Now, that's a challenge. The second issue is that because we are living in a consequence-free environment, the institutions that are meant to enforce consequences are not operational. Now, let me use the public protector as a good example. I think the PP will admit and accept the fact that the funding that goes towards the public protector is limited. And as a net consequence of that, when there's a failure in the Executive Ethics Act, it means that whatever the remedial actions that the public protector puts, the very same state can use its own resources to go challenge the remedial actions. I think citizens have become accustomed now to a universe where the only thing people fear is the idea of media and publicity. If you can survive the media cycle, the prosecutorial issues become less and less evident in the fact that people don't feel there are consequences. So if you want to build an ethical, capable state, I would argue let's build accountability. Let me wrap it up like this. I think our fundamental problem, and maybe this is the elephant in the room, when you look at both the two largest parties in the country, I can reflect on both of them because I've worked with both of them. But the difficult issue that the public protector is describing about it is an incident in the lobby, speaks to the fact that state capture is not seen as an act of corruption. It is seen as a policy. So if you want to agree on a contract, you don't go to the bureaucrats, you start with the political system so that there's an agreement. So for every 1 rand that the state gets in terms of its own taxes, I would argue and say if 22 cents of it goes to debt, 38 cents of it goes towards the payment of civil servants, 60 cents of it goes towards grant formation of some sort. The objectives then of the state is to really run an employment agency because the majority of its budget is to employ people. So therefore, politicians sometimes see the same mantra and then go into civil service to say, how can I create my own largesse that I can survive out of, which immediately corrupts the system. So I would argue we need to undo the notion of state capture. When I made the point about education and competence and developmental objectives, it was fundamentally because I wanted to get to the real heart of this issue. How do we free the state so that it can survive political headwinds and be capacitated with individuals who are competent enough to know that, in fact, they can stand up to political pressure? And then the last thing, maybe to speak as Professor Makanya so eloquently put it, the values within society then can be re-entrenched to say, actually, this is what we as a society are set up to do. This is what the academia is supposed to develop. This is what business is supposed to achieve as a collective values in society. Because when you then attend a church and the minister is also corrupt, you wonder what happens in that community in terms of re-entrenching those values. So I respond to the question about one of the things that we should celebrate is that after 31 years, we are seeing a degree of change and accountability by voters saying we are demanding change. I think in building capability going forward, we need to remind the leadership of the country that it remains accountable to the people and that ultimately there must be consequences, because commission after commission, yes, there's talk about, yes, there's been consequences and this, but the reality of it is the more I look at the political system, the more I realize how politicians are living in a consequence-free universe. And as a result of that, they re-entrench that to society to detrimental consequences to the public service. It corrupts the entire system. So let's deal with the consequence-effective, fund institutions that are able to effect consequences, PP, etc. Make sure there's resources in that space, and ultimately re-entrench into society values that say to ourselves, we ask better of ourselves. How would we live in a country where the majority of citizens are somewhat, religious or whatever the case might be, yet they elect crooks? I think we need to ask ourselves some really hard, honest questions as a society.
Thank you. So Honorable Maiman is the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee, a very important committee of Parliament which traces the movement of money. And as SAPAM, need to live up to that. and do research in that space also to understand what is actually happening, you know, in the movement of money. Public protector. Thank you. No, okay, a mic that's working.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just going to speak on two aspects. The issue of character formation. I think, Prof, you've brought in a very important phenomenon, and I think that's where our problem is as a society. DJ asked, where is the problem? It is the issue of character formation. But academia is not going to fix that problem, hey? If from early childhood, the behavior that the child sees at home is different to societal norms and morals, they are going to live that behavior. You wonder, program director, why we've got SRCs who are living the lifestyle that they are living. They say it from us, and they want it too. Be careful of the legacy that you are creating. Because if they don't acquire that wealth, the cars and the houses, then socially they are excluded, and they don't want to be excluded socially. And by the way, that's where greed comes from, because you want to be socially available and relevant. And then that is what erodes everything else, and ultimately it causes maladministration and corruption. So you don't begin by being a public servant or a bureaucrat. You start off by being the human being that you are. You are a son, you're a daughter, you are a father. How do you practice that? I normally say to people, you are a public servant, high earning, you don't pay maintenance, you go and you contest maintenance. Who must support your child? The state. You do business with the state, you don't support your child, the state must be the one who pays the social grants and take out money in terms of NFSs to educate your child, but you are earning and you are a high earner in the state. And thereafter, the state does nothing about it. We see maintenance as an issue of the rule of law in the courts. So we really need to start saying the issues that we allow within society to become the problems will ultimately become problems in the state. The second one is around effective implementation of reforms. You see, Honorable Maimane spoke about the effectiveness really of these constitutional institutions when they are under budgeted, and those institutions whom they investigate have got the budget to take them to court. And by the way, the legislation is crafted in such a manner that if I want to compel you to implement my remedial actions, I must take you to a civil suit. Where do I get that money? Well, what we have done now, and I hope, Honorable Maimane, you'll support us in the amendments which we've proposed, is that, in fact, non-implementation of remedial action or non-action towards remedial action must be criminalized. The courts have pronounced that it is unlawful, and if an act is unlawful, it is criminal. But again, it is the very same government that is saying, don't you think it's too harsh? Why? Because they actually want leeway not to implement reforms. Not so long ago, we found against the Free State government where they spent 6 million rands on a funeral of an MEC. 6 million. You know what happened? A month before that HOD went on pension, it took us on review. The report is on a standstill, and I'm happy that the Premier actually implemented and said, we are going to put a cut-off for state funerals. But the presidency is quiet. Where is the policy formation on state funerals? It's with the presidency. The presidency and National Treasury are quiet. Why are they quiet? Is it okay to pay 6 million rands to bury one person? So, again, we create conditions that make us not to comply. It goes back to the character and the behavior. Which law do you want that is going to say to you it is incorrect? And you know what was their defense? there's no legislation that actually describes what is excessive or what is reasonable. It's basically reasonable. Now, in your consciousness, we are suffering from a conscious deficit. That is our problem. It's as leadership, management, and as South Africans. And again, unlike what Honorable Maimane is saying, there's no consequence management for the political leadership because again, those very same people are going to be re-elected the following year, and they take it for granted. They take South Africans for granted. But for me, fighting corruption starts with the ordinary citizens of our country, for them to understand that for us allowing that, by even giving that vote, you are actually allowing corruption. If you know that that councillor has got no morals, has got no character, no ethics, as a person in society, why do you think that when they get into the corridors of council, they are going to be a different person? Thank you.
So in other words, we've moved from the value system to being legalistic about, no, I've not been arrested. I've not been charged. I've not been found guilty. So we no longer have the other aspect because they must coexist. There must be things that are wrong, even if they are not necessarily illegal. That's where the problem is now. Okay, Prof.
Over my career, I've trained judges, I've trained lawyers, I've trained public policy analysts, I've trained soldiers. All of these are institutions of government, of the state, of why the state functions and how it functions. And I find this panoply of questions very interesting. We've got the question of whether or not the Constitution is a solution to our problems or the cause of our problems. We've got the question, have we structured the culture of the administrative bureaucracy toward making solutions? We've got the question of whether or not we will be a failed state. So it's really our mission. Are we getting to where we want to go, where we need to go? We've got questions of ethics. And of course, we had the interesting solution about looking at the entire society. I would start out by saying, when fish go out for a drink on Friday night, they never discuss water. When fish talk about water, it's because the water is dirty. It's because the water is murky. They can't swim through it. They can't get where they're going. All of these questions are really part of a larger question I see, where we look at institutions, the Constitution, we look at institutions of bureaucracy, we look at planning. Are we having a plan that gets us where we want to go? Are we looking at the structural analysis and the loyalty and the development of a professional elected force? All of those questions are essentially, institutions are designed to create and develop results in society. But the society itself actually works on the basis of culture. Culture is that water that the fish swim in. So it's this overall perspective of who we are, where we want to go, what our goals are as a people, what do we expect of each other, of individuals. Are they honest? Are they dedicated? If we talk about, for example, just ethics, if we take that out of we deconstruct, as my friend Professor Masarula would say. If we deconstruct ethics as part and parcel of a larger structural analysis, what we're missing is that the ethics are just the result. Will I respond in a certain way? What you want is a change of spirit. Do I believe in my country? Do I want my country to be successful? I'm a public servant. Do I want my service, my department to be successful? What is my role in that? Obviously, an ethical person will say, yes, I follow the rules of ethics. They will also say, I need to go to work an hour early in the morning because there's more work to do tomorrow. Because the spirit, the élan, as the French would say, would be how we define where we want to go, what we want to do. In the First World War, a Professor de Grand Maison, who is later killed at Douai, Professor de Grand Maison had a theory of how the French army could be successful in a battle against a larger foe. And he called that the theory of Elan, the spirit of Elan, that you want to attack, you want to solve the problem, you want to go after what it is that's bothering you. And you want to be successful and wherever you were. If this is the private with a shovel digging a trench, is this the general defining an artillery plan to attack somewhere in battle? All of that was about this spirit. I think it's the spirit of South Africa you're trying to develop. It's not just, are we successful with the plan that we don't fail? Do we have the right law inside of the Constitution? Do we have the right bureaucratic structure and meaning and focus? It's all of those things together, but that's part of the culture. And it does have to be done by the individual, by the family, because that's the basis of the culture, who we are, where we want to go, and how we're successful. And if you have, and I would suggest three things that I would think in response. There's a lot more that could be said in the analysis. But one is that there needs to be a structure for national planning. And it's got to be outside of politics somehow. You've got to take the political part out of that. Plans are really made, and how I know what a priority is the budget. Whatever the plan is, whatever the legislative agenda is, for the year, however that's done, I can, as an outsider, I can sit down and look at the budget and say, that's the priority. You spend money on what you want. You have to have a national long-range planning process. You have to get at that. There has to be a way of changing the spirit of the country, not just a particular law, not just a constitutional amendment here or there. It's what the entire process gets you, and if it gets you where you want to go, because the Constitution itself, it's another form of plan. If that gets you where you want to go, it's sufficient. If it doesn't get you where you want to go, it needs to be changed. It can't be looked at as something in concrete. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is that I think you need a different look at resources. I have heard over and over again in various kinds of subject discussions that unemployment is this tremendous problem. The youth that's not focused, directed, educated towards a particular result is a particular problem. The unemployment in the youth in this country, that's not a problem. That is a resource. Unemployed youth, that's labor that can be focused toward physical resources to make results to grow the economy. The youth of the country are the future. These are the people that are going to make the new South Africa, changing their spirit, putting the ethics that you want inside of the curriculum that's going to get them where they want generally is going to be great. And those are the people that we're going to get into SAPAM later on, the people that are going to work in the bureaucracy, in the businesses, and all the other things. More could be said, but I probably should quit at that point.
Thank you,
I'm a
Prof.
guest. I'm not supposed to talk that much.
No. No, that's why you are here. Yes, yeah, in that order.
I think my contribution would be to recommend that the tender system be scrapped and we do it differently and it be more transparent and also have perhaps elder people residing over that who have gone over the understanding of greed and wanting to get somewhere. That as my contribution to your question directly, Prof. In terms of the rule of law, I think it's not a coincidence that I also have just come back from Singapore, and the rule of law reigns supreme there. I mean, ministers get jailed for just accepting gifts. And in this country, you have to declare, why do you need a gift? I mean, you get paid. And it starts from little things that shouldn't really be tolerated or shouldn't really become the norm because they lead to greater things. And I think in terms of failure in local government, it's not accidental. It's designed by confusion to protect the weak, and the accountability is even weak as it is. So for me, it's paid for by the dignity of our people. And it leads to the fact that we cannot enforce accountability within 90 days. Then we are certainly losing the plot. So for me, accountability becomes key in trying to really encompass a direction. The ethical component, in terms of its basis, I mean, it's there. We all learn as we grow, but we get corrupted as we begin to get into certain spaces and begin to want more than what we are supposed to have. So for me, there is space for growth as a public service, DG. And I think the policy on the fact that we have a revolving door policy for us to learn from other institutions also takes us out of our comfort zones, certainly to teach us more about how we can do things better and how we can take our country forward. So government is trying. We are not yet there. More needs to be done. And a few of us who have the courage, I would say courage, because yesterday I got an SMS to say, we hope you're going to say all the right things. All the right things for who? And I think it was on the basis that I'm talking as COGTA. And that's why sometimes I say I get more freedom talking as an academic, which then balances off program director, as you were saying, the interface between academia and governance, because then you are freer when you are in another platform to actually say things as they are from context. Thank you.
Okay, Prof.
I'm tempted to say that all what you said is what I wanted to say. And I know the chairperson will be very happy. Just a quick one. I got a sense that we seems to suggest that the professionalization agenda is the sole responsibility of government. It's fundamentally wrong. And that worries me, because it might be suggesting that we did not really take time to interrogate the report itself. 70%, if you do an analysis of the document, 70% of what is the content of the framework require the post-school education to play its role.
Yeah.
Because it talks about what you call a pre-entry preparation. And indeed, a PP, that pre-entry starts from the kindergarten, wherein you begin to teach people how to love South Africa. They grow up with a mindset that says that South Africa comes first. We had at least 3 important documents that I can actually remember that were produced in this country. The first one, of course, the framework. The second one, it was about the state of public service skill by PSITA. The third one, it was about the productivity report. How many of us in our academic departments did we dedicate time to discuss all those reports and try to look at their implication, particularly from the curriculum point of view? So that is a question that we need to answer. Let me quickly move to Dr. Maimane. You made mention about the appointment of the just before that, pardon me, Chairperson. Professionalization is not only about recruitment. And that's another thing that I picked up. That when we talk about it, we limit professionalization to recruit. It's not about that. It's just a little component of that. Still linked to recruitment process, Dr. Maimane, you did raise a concern about the appointment of the new Director of Public Prosecution, the criteria, so forth and so on. And it's very interesting that as South African, we always have brilliant ideas. We don't act out those ideas. Colleagues, if you remember, Frinithi Ngwala, when he was actually dealing with the case of the Pikoli, in that report, he has about 2 pages dedicated to how the director of the National Prosecution can actually be appointed. Excellent insight is there. But let me tell you, it will be coming to a retired DG to do some consultancy about how to appoint the process, design a process of how to appoint the National Director of Prosecution. Yet the answer have always been there. And that is something that we need to begin to look into. All those reports of the Commission of Inquiry, there is profound insight in those reports. But each time you'll see a consultant repeating what has long been the solution. In fact, many a times the consultants even give you a shoddy work. Right? And then from there, DG Bukela, the constitution should not be a problem. The problem is how do we manage our constitutional democracy? Just also going back to the whole, because education, I think it is critically important. I get a sense that we emphasize it and it's very important, particularly in the field of public administration. I don't really think that we are asking important questions related to how we should actually teach our future public servants. The guy who is my role model in terms of how to teach the field is Cecil Nhloko. He was there at Fort Hare in 1945. His student was Robert Sibukwe. He was teaching the predecessor of public administration called native administration. He was given the books that the apartheid system said that they ought to be used. Cecil Nhloko went beyond those books. And that is where Robert Sibukwe got his political consciousness. And he started to understand the true nature of administration of that time. Because public administration, in many ways, even today, has not yet extricated itself from the colonial apartheid edifice. It is still there, okay. Right? Just to go to the last point, I've been battling with this question of state capacity for quite some time, to the extent that I appear to have developed a hypothesis that perhaps to a very great extent since 1994, we managed to build state capacity without institutionalizing capability. And the consequences of that is what? Who is the name of the professor again? I forgot his name. He called it institutional fundamentalism. In other words, built-in state capacity without institutionalizing capability will always result in institutional fundamentals. I think that is where we are as a country. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Prof. So, colleagues, let me quickly thank the panelists. We are running out of time. But the last point deals with the difference between capacity and capability. So capacity means that we have a team called Kaizer Chiefs with players. Capability is the ability of those players to gel and win. So that's the difference between capacity and capability. Without much ado, I'll ask the president to come and hand over the presents to the panelists. And one of us has lost a key. I will not tell you which car it is. You can come and collect your keys from me. But over to you, President. My man is going to get his via AI. Honorable Maiman, AI is going to give you a gift. Oh, a public protector.
Thank you.
Okay, and face.
Yes.
No, these are scholarly gifts. Yeah. Yeah, scholarly gifts are allowed. Prof? Okay, rise. Okay, the two home people. Yeah, Bashab. So, colleagues, as you heard earlier on, we have invited the public protector. to be part of this family of ideation. It's a very important part of our life as a nation. So the relevant people present will follow up so that we broaden the cycle and also intensify our engagement with a parliament. The chair of the appropriations committee has accepted this robust engagement and more research work together with the committee. And the mayor of Tshwane also, we have invited Tshwane to join the family as part of the partners of SAPAM so that we can add rigor and vigor in our work. My apology for the time, but the people that we invited definitely needed more time to engage with us. The whole public protector coming here just to spend 5 minutes would not have been the best way to do things. So when we leave here, let's go to our respective sessions and then straight away continue with the work that we've been doing. Thanks very much to everyone.